The river is black. You cannot see the bottom. You cannot hear anything except the water and your own breathing and the sound of a man who has run out of places to run. His name is Jacob, and his name is the problem. He is standing at the edge of the Jabbok, a river that cuts through what is now the northern part of Jordan, and he is alone. He has sent everything and everyone he loves across the ford: his wives, his children, his servants, his livestock. He is the last one, and he stays behind not out of courage, but because something in him, some deep and wordless part of him, knows that he cannot cross this river as Jacob anymore. He just doesn't know how to become anything else. In Hebrew, the name Yaakov means heel grabber. It means supplanter, the one who trips you from behind. He earned it at birth, coming out of the womb with his hand gripped around his twin brother's heel, as if he were already trying to pull the other man down and take his place. And for decades, he lived into that name with extraordinary precision. He deceived his blind father. He stole his brother's birthright. He manipulated his father-in-law. He accumulated wealth through cleverness that bordered on dishonesty. He ran, always ran from every consequence he ever created. He is not a monster. That is not the point. He is something harder to dismiss than a monster. He is a man who became exactly what people called him. And tonight, Esau is one day's walk away with 400 armed men. There is a verse tucked into the second chapter of Revelation that almost no one stops at long enough to feel the weight of it. It contains a promise so intimate, so specific, that I am going to ask you to hold it in the back of your mind for the entire length of this video. We will get to it, but we cannot get to it yet because to understand what that verse means, we first need to go back further than Jacob. We need to go back to a man sitting outside his tent in the scorching midday heat, 99 years old, listening to the voice of God tell him that his name, the name he had carried for nearly a century, was no longer his name. His name had been Abram, and Abram meant exalted father, for 99 years. Think about what that name cost him. In the ancient Near East, your name was not decoration. It was not a label parents chose because it sounded pleasant. The historian Josephus, writing in his Antiquities of the Jews, records that Hebrew parents selected names with careful deliberation because a name, in their understanding, was prophetic. It declared the child's future into existence the moment it was spoken. Your name told everyone at the well, everyone in the marketplace, everyone who passed your tent, who you were and what your life was for. Abram was exalted father. Every morning he woke up to a name that announced what he did not have. Every time a neighbor called out to him across the camp, Abram, exalted father. The gap between his name and his reality must have felt like pressing a thumb into a bruise. He was 75 when God first called him out of Ur of the Chaldeans. He was 99 when God appeared to him again. In 24 years of following the voice across deserts, down into Egypt, and back again, not a single child between him and his wife, Sarai. And then God does something that no seminary lecture has ever made feel as strange as it actually is. He doesn't give Abram a new name. By replacing the old one entirely, he inserts a letter, one letter, a single Hebrew character, He. Abram becomes Avraham, Abraham. Sarai becomes Sarah, Sarah. The letter He in Hebrew is the sound of a breath, just a breath. And that same letter, that same breath sound, appears in the divine name itself, Yah, the short form of God's name. God exhales himself into the names of two people who had stopped expecting anything to change. He breathes his own name into their identities, and in that single exhale, The old names do not get erased, they get expanded. They carry something of God inside them now. Here's what most people miss about this moment. Abraham fell on his face when he heard the new name. Genesis chapter 17, verse 3 is careful to record that. And Sarah, when she heard hers, Sarah, the mother of nations, laughed. She actually laughed, not politely, genuinely, because she was 90 years old, and this was absurd. And God said, notice how he says it, why did Sarah laugh? Not a rebuke, a question, as if he wanted her to hear herself, as if the laughter was the first evidence that somewhere in her, behind all the grief and the waiting and the hardened acceptance that this was simply not going to happen, something had cracked open. You do not laugh at something that has absolutely no chance. You only laugh when some frightened, unguarded part of you has already started to believe. The name came before the child. This is the pattern. This is the first law of how God renames people. He does not wait until you have already become the thing. He puts the new name on you in the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the waiting, the failure, the long season when nothing looks any different. He puts it on you like a coat, 2 sizes too large, and then he walks patiently alongside you as you grow into it. Back to the river, back to the dark. Jacob is alone at the Jabbok ford, and the stranger appears without warning. The text of Genesis 32 gives you no introduction. One moment, Jacob is standing in the dark by a black river. The next moment, hands are on him, and the two of them begin to wrestle. The Hebrew word used here is ya'avek. Scholars have noted for centuries that this single word contains within it the name of the river Jabbok and the name of the man Yaakov. The very word for wrestling is threaded through Jacob's identity. He has been wrestling his entire life with his twin brother inside the womb, with his father in a darkened tent, with his father-in-law across 20 years of complicated labor, with God in his own heart on every road he ran down. He just didn't know until this night that God was willing to get down on the ground with him. They wrestle until the sky begins to lighten. Hours. 2 bodies in the mud on the bank of a river, locked together in the dark. And at some point before dawn, the stranger does something remarkable. He reaches out and touches Jacob's hip. Just one touch, and the joint comes out of its socket. Let that land. If the stranger can do that with a single touch, he could have ended this fight in the first minute. He chose not to. He stayed in the mud with Jacob all night. He let the heel grabber hold on. This is not an accident. This is the entire point. Because Jacob, the man who got everything he ever wanted through cleverness and deception and manipulation, is finally, for the first time in his life, doing something completely without strategy. He is just holding on. No scheme, no angle, no trick waiting in the sleeve of his robe. Just 2 hands and whatever is left of his strength and a desperate refusal to let go. And here's what most people miss. When the stranger finally says, "Let me go, for it is dawn," Jacob says something that should sound unremarkable, but is actually one of the most extraordinary sentences in the entire Old Testament. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Not, "I will not let you go unless you guarantee Esau spares my life." Not, "Unless you tell me I am going to win tomorrow." Not, "Unless you explain to me why all of this happened." He asks for a blessing. After everything, the dislocated hip, the exhaustion, the long, terrible dark, the one thing he wants is to be blessed by this stranger he cannot clearly see. And then the stranger asks a question. "What is your name?" This is not a simple question. This is the most loaded question in the book of Genesis. The last time someone asked Jacob his name in a high-stakes moment was in a darkened tent. His blind father Isaac had reached out his hands and said, just before giving away the blessing meant for his older son. "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob opened his mouth and lied. He said, "I am Esau, your firstborn." He stole the blessing with the false name. Now God asked the same question in the dark. And Jacob, limping, exhausted, holding on with everything, tells the truth. "My name is Jacob. My name is heel grabber. My name is the one who tricks and runs. My name is the man who has spent his whole life taking what was not his and paying for it in isolation and fear." That moment of honesty, that stripped down confession of exactly who he has been, is the hinge. "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob," the stranger says, "but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." The church father Jerome, writing in the 4th century in his Hebrew Questions on Genesis, traces the name Yisrael to the root sarah, to contend, to strive, to press against. Combined with El, the Hebrew word for God, Jerome renders it Prince of God, or He who contends with God. It is a name that does not sanitize the wrestling. It does not pretend the night didn't happen. It enshrines the night. The struggle is not the shame. The struggle is the story. Jacob was not renamed because he became a better person before dawn. He was renamed because he refused, with the broken hip and empty hands and no tricks left, to let go. He limped away from that river. The text is precise about this. The sinew of his hip was damaged, and from that day forward, the children of Israel did not eat that particular part of an animal in his honor. Every step Jacob took for the rest of his life, every morning he got up and put weight on that leg and felt the old wound, was a physical memory of the night the stranger touched him. He carried the mark of the wrestling in his body for the rest of his life. But he walked toward Esau with the new name, and Esau 400 armed men behind him, every reason in the world to take revenge, ran. He ran not to attack. He ran to embrace. He fell on his brother's neck and wept. The man Jacob had spent 20 years dreading had been waiting to forgive him, because Jacob was not Jacob anymore. Stay with me, because the next name change is the one that almost nobody notices. And when you see what it means, you will not be able to unsee it. Numbers chapter 13 reads like a roster, a list of names, 12 men being sent as spies into Canaan before the invasion. Moses reads through the tribes, reads through the names, and then beside one particular entry, the text pauses and adds a quiet note that most readers skip entirely. Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Yeshua. He renames him right there before the mission. No ceremony, no divine encounter. Moses just changes the name and moves on. The original name Hoshea means salvation. It is a strong name, an honorable name, but Moses adjusts it to Yeshua, which means the Lord saves. He takes the root word for salvation and places God's name Yah at the front of it. The act of saving is no longer attributed to the man. It is attributed to God. Human effort becomes divine action. Hoshea becomes Yeshua. We know this man today by his Greek name, Joshua. But his Hebrew name, the name Moses gave him in the desert, was Yeshua. And that name, that precise name, is the Hebrew name of Jesus. Moses, standing in a desert camp 15 centuries before Bethlehem, renamed a military commander with the name that would one day be whispered by an angel to a young woman in Nazareth. He did not know that. He was doing what leaders do, preparing his people for what lay ahead. But God knew. And this is where the pattern becomes something you cannot explain away. Every name change we have looked at follows the same invisible thread. God inserts himself, his breath, his name, his nature into the identity of a person who cannot complete their mission as they are. Abram cannot father nations under his old name. Sarai cannot mother them. Jacob cannot lead Israel as the heel grabber. Hosea cannot lead the people into the promised land. The name change is not cosmetic. It is surgical. It cuts away the old identity and grafts in a new one. And always, always, it costs something to receive it. If this video is landing for you, if something in these stories is connecting with something in your own life, I want to ask you to do one thing right now. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every week, there is a new story, a new name, a new moment in scripture where God reached into an ordinary or broken or terrified person's life and said, that is not who you are anymore. This is who you are. And if someone shared this with you or you found it in a search, welcome. Stay to the end. What is coming in the next 15 minutes is the part that changes how you read your own story. Because we need to talk about what happens when someone else tries to rename you first. The year is approximately 605 BC. A Babylonian army has taken Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king in the known world, has done what conquerors do. He has taken the best of the conquered. The text of Daniel chapter 1 says, he ordered his officials to bring to Babylon young men from Israel who were without blemish, physically strong, intellectually sharp, socially capable, and suited to serve in the palace of the king. And then, before anything else happens, before a single lesson is taught or a single meal is served, Nebuchadnezzar does something deliberate and calculated. He renames them. Daniel becomes Belteshazzar. Bel, protect his life, a name invoking a Babylonian god. Hananiah becomes Shadrach. Mishael becomes Meshach. Azariah becomes Abednego. Pay attention to what is happening here. This is not an administrative convenience. This is not a pronunciation problem. This is a systematic identity replacement. Nebuchadnezzar understood, as every empire has understood, that the most effective way to destroy a people is not to kill them. It is to make them forget who they are. Daniel's Hebrew name meant God is my judge. Hananiah meant God is gracious. Mishael meant who is what God is. Azariah meant God has helped. Every one of their names contained within it a declaration about the God of Israel, and every one of their new Babylonian names replaced that declaration with the name of a foreign god. The king was not just changing names, he was attempting to change gods. But here is the remarkable thing, and this is where the counter pattern shows up, the dark mirror of every name change we have looked at so far. Daniel, given a Babylonian name, does not become Babylonian. He refuses the king's food because it violates the laws of his people. He prays 3 times a day toward Jerusalem, even when it is made illegal. Even when he knows the penalty, he interprets the king's dreams and gives credit not to Babylonian wisdom, but to the God of Israel, the God whose name was embedded in his Hebrew name that they had tried to take from him. And his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, the Babylonian names, the names the empire gave them, are thrown into a furnace for refusing to bow to a golden statue. Here's the part nobody tells you. The miracle in the furnace does not happen under their Hebrew names. It happens under their Babylonian names. Nebuchadnezzar himself calls out into the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and what he sees stops him cold. 4 figures walking in the fire, unbound. The 4th, he says, looks like a son of the gods. God did not require them to recover their Hebrew names before he showed up for them. He showed up in the furnace under the names the empire gave them. He showed up in the middle of the identity the world had forced on them. Because the name the world gives you, the name your worst season gave you. the name your family's damage gave you, the name your failures branded into your confidence, does not determine whether God can reach you. It does not fence him out. Daniel never forgot his name. His friends never forgot theirs. But even if the weight of captivity had worn down the memory of who they once were, God would still have walked into the furnace. There is more than one way to be renamed. God renames people to call them forward. The world renames people to hold them back. And Scripture is very clear about which renaming has the final word. His name was Simon, son of John, a fisherman from Bethsaida on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. He had not crossed the river in the dark. He had not wrestled anyone. He had not been carried off to a foreign capital and forced to learn a new language. He was just a man with a boat and calloused hands and a brother named Andrew, standing on a shoreline the day someone brought him to meet a rabbi from Nazareth. And Jesus looked at him the way you look at someone when you are not seeing who they are right now, but who they are going to be, and said, "You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas." Cephas in Aramaic, Petros in Greek, Peter in English, the rock. Here's what Jesus knew when he said it, and what Simon did not know yet. This man, this impulsive, loud, emotionally volatile Galilean fisherman, would deny ever knowing Jesus 3 times in a single night. He would do it beside a fire in a courtyard while Jesus was being beaten 40 feet away. He would hear the rooster crow, and the text says he went outside and wept bitterly. He would go back to fishing afterward because he genuinely did not know what else to do. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a rock. But Jesus named him one before any of that happened. This is the second law of how God renames people. He does not rename you after you have proven yourself. He does not wait for the evidence to come in before he makes the declaration. He looks at who you are going to be, at the finished version of you that he can already see, and he speaks that version into your present reality. Before you have earned it, before you believe it, before you have any idea what it is going to cost you to grow into it. And now watch what most people miss about Peter's story. 3 years pass, the denial happens, the crucifixion happens, and then the resurrection. And then a morning by the Sea of Galilee, the same sea where Peter once dropped his nets to follow Jesus, and a charcoal fire on the beach. Jesus is there. And he asked Peter 3 questions. Simon, son of John, do you love me? He uses the old name, Simon, not Peter, not the rock. 3 times he asks, once for each denial. And 3 times Peter says yes. And 3 times Jesus says, feed my sheep, tend my lambs, follow me. The renaming was not undone by the failure, but the restoration required going back through the door of the original name, the Simon, the son of John, the fisherman who ran, and coming out the other side as something new. Peter did not earn the name by being perfect. He received it by being honest about who he had been and by saying yes anyway. And then there is Paul, Saul of Tarsus, Pharisee, persecutor, a man who stood in the crowd and held the coats while a mob stoned a young man named Stephen to death for preaching Jesus. A man who went house to house in Jerusalem, dragging Christians out by force. A man who was on the road to Damascus, not searching for God, he was hunting God's people. And then a light knocked him to the ground. Here's the part nobody tells you about Saul's name change. The Bible never records a moment where God formally renames him. There is no divine encounter where a voice says, from this day forward, you are Paul. In Acts chapter 13, the text simply shifts. One sentence, Saul. Next sentence, Paul. No announcement, no ceremony, just a quiet, almost invisible pivot. But scholars have noted for 20 centuries what that shift means. Saul, the great Hebrew name, the name of the first king of Israel, a man chosen for his height and his pedigree and the impressiveness of his exterior. Paul, from the Latin Paulus, it means small, humble, of little account. The man who built his entire identity on external credentials, bloodline, education, rank, religious status, slowly, without fanfare, takes a name that means small. He writes to the church at Philippi that everything he once counted as his greatest assets, he now regards as loss. The pedigree, the training, the Hebrew of Hebrews lineage, all of it reclassified. Not deleted, reclassified, counted differently. He became small so the message could become enormous. And this is where the second thread of the pattern shows up. The thread that Paul's story introduces and Daniel's story confirms. Not every renaming from God happens in a single night at a river. Not every renaming comes with a divine voice pronouncing your new identity over you in the dark. Sometimes God renames you slowly, over years, through the accumulation of losses that strip away the false name you were living under. You thought your name was successful, and then the business failed. You thought your name was needed, and then the relationship ended. You thought your name was strong, and then the diagnosis came. And in the long, quiet, humbling aftermath, you discover that the name you were grieving was never the true name. It was just the one you had learned to answer to. This is not the end of the story. It is not the end of the renaming. It has not ended with Abraham. It has not ended with Jacob. It has not ended with Daniel. It has not ended with Peter or with Paul. And it has not ended with you. In Revelation chapter 2, the risen Jesus is dictating 7 letters to 7 churches across Asia Minor. Most people who have spent any time in Scripture know this section. Most people have at least scanned it. But there is a single sentence in the letter to the church at Pergamum that I have been carrying since the opening of this video. You have been holding it in the back of your mind. Here it is. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone, with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. A white stone, a new name, known only to the one who receives it. In the Roman world, the original readers of Revelation lived in, a white stone carried 2 specific meanings. When an athlete won a contest, he was given a white stone as his entry token to the victory feast. Proof of the win, your name on a stone that got you through the door. And in the courts of Rome, when a jury voted to acquit a defendant, they cast a white stone. A white stone was a verdict of innocence, an exoneration. The case is closed, and you are free. God is saying through the mouth of the risen Christ to people who are being persecuted and pressured and told their faith was dangerous and their identity was shameful, that at the end of all things, every person who has held on through the long, dark night will receive a stone. White. Victory and acquittal in one object. And on that stone will be written a name. Your name. The name he has called you from before the world began. Not the name your worst day gave you. Not the name the voice in your head at 3 a.m. uses when it is cataloging your failures. Not the name your family history wrote on you, or the name the hardest season of your life branded into your confidence. The name he chose. The name he sees when he looks past everything you have been and sees everything he is making you into. Here is something remarkable about that promise. Every name change we have looked at in this video was public. Abraham's new name was announced in the open. Jacob wrestled at a river and walked into the daylight with a limp that everyone could see, a permanent, visible reminder of where he had been. Moses renamed Joshua in front of the entire congregation of Israel. Simon was renamed in front of his brother. Paul's transformation was watched by churches across the Mediterranean world. But the name on the white stone, that final name, the truest name, is private. It is between you and God alone. No one else will know it. No one else can claim it. It is not a public declaration. It is a whisper. The most intimate thing imaginable, the creator of the universe leaning close and saying, "This is what I have always called you, in the place where I know you better than you know yourself." Here are the 3 things I want you to carry out of this video. The first, God renames people at their lowest point, not their highest. He did not rename Abraham after Isaac was born. He renamed him 24 years into the waiting, when everything still looked the same and nothing had changed, and Sarah had long since stopped expecting anything to change. If you are in a season that feels permanent and impossible, if you are at the Jabbok, in the dark, alone, with nothing left but your grip, you may be closer to your new name than you have ever been. The second, the new name always comes before the person is ready. Simon was called Peter before the denial. Jacob was called Israel while he was still limping. The name is not a certificate of completion. It is a promise of direction. God does not wait for you to finish becoming. He names you in the middle of becoming. And then he walks alongside you for every limping step of the journey until you arrive at the person he already knows you are. And the third, the one I want to be the last thing you hear today. You are not the name your worst day gave you. Not the name your father spoke in anger. Not the name your own shame gave you in the quiet. Not the one who failed. Not the one who left. Not the one who couldn't hold it together. Jacob carried the name deceiver for decades. Paul spent years in the desert before any church trusted him. Peter lived inside his own memory of a courtyard and a fire and 3 denials for the rest of his life. And God looked at every single one of them at the full record, nothing hidden, everything known, and said, "That is not your name. There is a white stone. It already exists. It was prepared before you took your first breath. And on it is written the name of the person God has been making you into across every hard season, every failure, every night at the river where you had nothing left but your grip." Which of these name changes hit you the hardest today? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. You have been wrestling in the dark. You have been limping toward the morning. You have been holding on with the last of what you have. Let go of the old name. It was never the true one.